When Zsuzsi Gartner writes fiction, it is rarely historical. It is hip, current, and futuristic, and it's laced with wit, humor, and astute observations about everything from life in a cul-de-sac to the attraction of motivational speakers. Her new collection of short stories is called Better Living Through Plastic Explosives. It is my pleasure to welcome Zsuzsi Gartner to Studio 4 to tell us more. A pleasure to meet you.
Well, thank you for having me here.
You're one of the few university graduates I know who actually is using your degree, MFA in creative writing. You're actually writing.
Well, I have two previous degrees, which political science and journalism, and I worked in journalism for a long time before I flipped over and focused on the fiction.
So you could tell fibs and lies.
That's true. Well, I think of fiction as a better way to tell the truth than memoir. Like, there's more true things, even though it's made up.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
It does.
Dishing all the truisms is the way you see the world. You know?
And you can actually say how you see the world without anybody giving you any flack because it's all made up.
Well, yes.
So to speak.
So to speak, yes.
Or perhaps not.
Well, I don't write anything autobiographical, but I do use the world itself and what's happening in it as a jumping off point, because I write social satire, so it's grounded in, you know, the crazy reality that we live in today.
And you noticed we lived in a little crazy reality after the hockey game, and it's interesting to me that Better Living Through Plastic Explosives, last story in the book, focuses on terrorist wannabes, sort of. Tell me about that story.
What that story, there's a long story for that story, because the last story in my previous book, which is called All the Anxious Girls on Earth, and the last story was an act of terrorism that was perceived to be an act of terrorism, but was really kind of taken to be an act of heroism. They got the wrong person. And I wanted to write about the Squamish Five and the youngest terrorist and how people romanticize these things. But it went off in another direction. So then I wanted to take on this issue again. And I'm fascinated by these stories of these women in the States. There's several. There's one called Karen Soleil, I think. And there's a few others that disappear. Like, they're wanted, they take on a new identity, they're suburban housewives, they support, you know, they're soccer moms, they support the theater, and then they're found out, and their husbands had no idea, their children, they reinvent themselves, which is a very American thing. So I actually wanted to look at that, how somebody could have committed a heinous act based on, you know, young ideology, and then become a different person, functioning in society as just this ordinary person, but they still crave, they're addicted to the idea of blowing things up. So where I took that, it's a support group for recovering terrorists. So it's like the alcoholics say, you know, you're never not, you're a recovering alcoholic.
Or I will always be an alcoholic.
Yeah, you're not a non-alcoholic, you just don't drink. So these are not non-terrorists, they just don't commit acts of terror or are trying not to. So that's one of the premises in that story.
Yes, and a little City Hall encounter, a woman, that's in Plastic Explosives, right?
Yes.
All she wants in her neighborhood is a traffic circle.
Or a speed retardant. That's what they call these things, yes.
And of course she goes through all the red tape at City Hall and can't get anywhere, and she has this, we all have those evil thoughts, don't we? You know, one day I'll just blow up City Hall. Yeah. Or maybe not.
Are you allowed to say that on air right now?
No, not right now. But hasn't everybody had the thought, we don't intend to do it? Certainly not. Well, some do. Yeah. But why the title, Better Living Through Plastic Explosives?
Well, that story was hard to title for a long time till I got to a scene that I was writing where it's set in the past and she's with her little guerrilla group and they're discussing this idea of kitchen munitions, and then that got me thinking of the good housekeeping. They're making it sound like a recipe, you know, like something cozy, kitchen munitions, because they're actually called that. Homemade explosives are often called kitchen munitions. Did much research. As a friend of mine put it, they probably got me on the Homeland Security thing in the U.S. because I was doing a lot of research into how to make bombs and stuff online.
Right.
But so I wanted to signal for the story and then the title of the book that I wanted to signal the satire. So this idea of better living, you know, the better living through chemistry. and how that all went. But that was this is going to save the world. So I was playing through that. I was playing through the idea of here's this thing that's destructive, and we're saying this is going to improve things. And that's how a lot of terrorists think. You know, we're going to blow things up and the world will be a better place.
It's my job to be an anarchist.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't believe the anarchist theory, though, about the riots. I don't buy it.
What do you think happened at those riots,
well,
from your perspective?
Okay, so I'm going to, now nobody's going to like me, but I'm not a hockey fan. I'm not anti. I don't really care. I watched the last bits with my husband, and he was out of town, so he comes home 10:30 that night. I knew they'd lost, and I was already reading in bed, and he said, you wouldn't believe what's happening, because they were showing it on the plane, and the pilot came on and said, if anyone's headed downtown, you might want to change your plans. And so people were getting other hotels. And so we went down, we watched till midnight. It was on live coverage on till midnight. I watched, can I mention a network?
Of course.
I thought the CTV coverage was amazing. Like because they had the helicopter, and then they had the guy.
Well, their studios.
And they had the guy on the ground, and we watched till they went off air. Then I watched the National. And I was so sickened, but if you're watching, you're not, those guys, the demographic of, it wasn't a handful of thugs, as the mayor says. It was hundreds and hundreds of people, and other people egging them on. 20-year-old guys, and I said to my sister, 20-year-old white guys, and she said they weren't all white, and I said, but they're a kind of guy. It doesn't matter if they were Asian or you know, East Indian or white. They're a kind of guy, a frat guy, thick necks, short hair, no fashion sense, drunk.
Yeah, bullies.
And they were rampaging bullies. And I don't think somebody kind of said, oh, let's trigger the rampaging bullies. They're saying it was the same people who instigated during the Olympics. But I find these guys, this wasn't the same anarchist kind of pool of people.
They may have started. I'm thinking if you're getting on the SkyTrain with a Molotov cocktail in your pocket. And
well,
gin, that's not good.
But there's not, these were like, we're talking thousands and then hundreds that wouldn't go home.
That was those were the bullies. There was like there's a bully circle, and then there's others who are wannabes, and one day they'll grow up and be corporate executives, perhaps, and maybe not, and remember the riot in Vancouver.
But if you're watching, and you're, you know, if you were watching for that 2 hours live, it was huge, and it was just stomach turning.
A lot of drunks.
Yeah.
And you're right, that frat party mentality, jumping off roofs, doing really silly things.
It's the social media thing. They're living in basically. Like, I want to be on television. It's that mentality. There's a picture the National Post took, and the car's burning in the back. And there's a young woman in her Canucks jersey, and she's doing this.
Like a total disconnect.
And it's totally, and everybody has their cameras up, right? And it's like they're living through in a mediated experience.
Living through image.
Yeah.
So
they're not even really
kissing.
There. Yeah.
Did you see that picture of the couple making out?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cars on fire, things happening, and they're making out because it would make a good image.
I mean, it was the very thing I like, the imagery. I love apocalyptic imagery, but at the same time seeing it in real life, like it looked like a war zone. And what were we rioting for? The right to riot. I mean, it's really sad and depressing. And
now we have the right to write on a wall and say, this is really a good city, because we don't live in Tiananmen Square. Yeah. I guess. Yeah. But you have...
so it's the kind of fodder, that's the kind of thing that gives me fodder. It's the kind of thing I'll process and turn into something else down the road.
It's the beginning of a story.
Yeah.
You have a story in the book about kind of rough around the edges guy who moves into a very trendy cul-de-sac.
The truck guy.
The truck guy. Guido, is that his name?
Guido's the dog.
Guido's the dog.
The guy, we don't know his name.
That's right, he's a nameless.
They call him the truck guy, the meat guy, then he's the meat guy, and then he's Lucy, like the missing link.
That's right. And
I deliberately don't name him because the guys make up identities for him, the other guys.
Sure, because he's like muscly and he likes to barbecue and he so doesn't fit in the cul-de-sac. Well, the women are...
He's a 1970s guy.
Very much so.
He's based on a boyfriend I had, like way back when. Like, I mean, we shouldn't say it's not a Vancouver person, so they.
That's
won't
okay, but it's men. You know, men like him exist, but you'd never met one. But you had. You say.
I grew up in Calgary.
Okay,
so he's like the Calgary guy come to Vancouver, the metrosexual cul-de-sac in Vancouver. Or he's like one of those guys downtown rampaging when he's a bit older.
He's got the cigarette. Well, they don't put cigarettes in their shirts anymore, but I know I can see him.
He's a mix. It's like the James Dean mixed with the 70s hoser mixed with, you know.
He's a truck tinkering macho barbecue man with a big dog, and he smokes and he drinks and he moves into trendy cul-de-sac populated by pretentious foodies, and they invite him for dinner and stuffed morel mushrooms or do whatever they do. And he's as puzzled as they are, perhaps. We won't give the story away.
No.
Who taught you to write? Did you just start? Did you love it from the beginning?
I was one of those kids who wrote books, you know, wrote a book of poems for Mother's Day when I was in grade 2, and then when I was in grade 5, I tried to write my own version of the Narnia Chronicles. You know, I was one of those kids.
In grade 5?
Yeah, but I mean to myself, like in notebooks.
Right,
you know.
sure.
But I always wrote. I always did fiction, but it wasn't. It took a long time to gel. My juvenilia is just hideous, and I ended up going into journalism, and kind of developing writing chops, like using the writing interest, but doing newspaper journalism. Then worked in TV, and then mostly magazines for 10 years, freelance. And then came back to the fiction, and I think the lull in doing that actually helped my fiction. It gave me things to write about that I think if I had just gone and said, you know, I'm going to be a writer and started pittering away in my 20s, I think what I would have done would have been less substantial than the kind of stuff I'm doing now. Like the journey was longer, but it's been fertilized in a different way than some writers, I think.
Right. And there's much of Vancouver in this book. Names we know. Jeff Wall, great photo conceptualist, artist.
And one of the photos in the post looked like a Jeff Wall.
It did.
It was fire with the mounted police. And I called my husband over. I was on my laptop. I said, oh my God, it looks like a Jeff Wall.
Right.
Yeah.
But he wasn't there, thank goodness. There's a woman in the book you call Honey Fortunata. She's a realtor. She drives a Hummer. And we'll talk about that when we come back. Zsuzsi Gartner, Better Living Through Plastic Explosives, short stories, very funny, satirical, all of the things she does well. We'll come back.